I just want to preface this by saying all of the following actually happened. I've been lucky enough to have a couple of experiences with the paranormal in my life, and this happens to be one of those instances. When I graduated college, I moved back home, into that weird post-grad limbo, where I look for a real job and try and figure out what it is I want to do for the rest of my life. In the meantime, I wanted one last summer of procrastination before I jumped into the real world. So, I asked my friend to hook me up with a job at the local movie theatre. He had worked there for a couple of summers during school as a morning cleaner, running a shift from 4 AM to 10 AM every morning. It wasn't a great job, but it paid more than minimum wage, which was pretty hard to come by in a town oversaturated with college kids. I interviewed and got the job, where I was highly recommended by my friend. The guy who interviewed me would also be my manager, a scruffy guy named Jeff. He smoked like a chimney and made tank tops and cut-off jeans a solid part of wardrobe. He also looked like he hadn't had a good night's sleep in years, but that could also have been all the hard drinking he did every night. I remember he asked me the typical questions, if I was okay with working weird hours, cleaning up vomit, etc. I had worked in fast food as a teenager, so none of that stuff had bothered me. What struck me as odd was the last question he asked. "Do you scare easy?" I kinda laughed and said no. He shrugged and said, "Well, some new highs kinda get spooked by the big building at night. But you know how it is, big buildings make weird noises." It made sense to me. I have a very active imagination, but I had a hard time being scared in a movie theatre of all places. I was to start my new job the very next day. For the first few weeks, everything was pretty normal. The job was actually pretty easy, all things considered. Throw this away, mop that, scrub this, wipe that, take the garbage out. You're probably by yourself for a majority of the shift. So we were allowed to bring our iPods with us. The theatre was fairly large. Its layout was shaped like a T, with the lobby and bathrooms in the stem, the smaller theatres on the left, and the larger IMAX screens on the right. Running above the theatre hallway was the projection area, an equally long hallway with a couple of small offices and all the projector equipment. If you were the first to arrive in the morning, you had to go up a winding staircase to turn on the lights in all the theatres. It wasn't a big deal, except with all the lights off, the building can be, as Jeff once described it, a little creepy. The projector area was always full of promotional materials, including a sea of cardboard cutouts from all the movies that have played in the theatre. Sometimes the theatre manager would have giveaways and the staff would be able to take some of the things home. It was pretty cool, but when the lights were off, it looked like a sea of people in the hallway. Another part of our job was to meet with the day crew after our shift at 10 AM, and to go over any maintenance problems that we were dealing with, and they could highlight anything we needed to address on our next shift. The second thing to strike me as odd was the day manager, Bob, pulling me aside after a shift. "You're the new guy, right?" he asked. I said yeah, and then he put a pair of keys into my hands. "Can you make sure this place is locked up at night? I know you guys are usually up in the back or upstairs. I don't want anyone sneaking in whilst you're occupied." I asked him if it were a problem, and he looked at me a little flustered, and went on to explain that customers, primarily women, were complaining about a lanky, tall man in a suit that had been following them from theatre to theatre, sometimes into the bathroom. The last several months, several frightened women had come to the front desk describing a 7-foot tall man in a black suit, complete with a bowler cap, walking slowly after them. A few times even the police were called. The teenagers that worked the day shift referred to him as the tall man. While he primarily targeted women, occasionally a male co-worker would catch a glimpse of him sneaking into a theatre. On a couple of occasions they would pursue, thinking it was someone trying to sneak into a movie, only to find nobody there. Sometimes there wasn't even a movie playing. We had 12 theatre rooms in total, but Theatre 5 was the worst. Nobody wanted to clean it out. When I first started, I was fairly naive about what was going on, and I didn't understand why Jeff was apprehensive about Theatre 5 and kept assigning me to clean it out. What made Theatre 5 unique was that it sat behind the bathrooms in the lobby. So, to get to the sitting area, you had to walk down a long hallway before reaching the screening room. Being that far back, you were the most secluded, especially when it's 4 AM, and the only other people that you are with are on the far other side of the building. People cleaning there would complain of nosebleeds, constant headaches, and a feeling of being watched. My first supernatural experience took place here. Theatre 5 always gave me an uneasy feeling, like I was being watched. On multiple occasions, I would take out my earbuds and shout, "Hello?" into the empty theatre. Of course, there would be no response, and I would shake it off and just go back to my routine. One day, I was sweeping out garbage from under the seats when I heard footsteps. Someone running. I look down at the front of the theatre, and I catch a glimpse of a little blonde-haired boy turning the corner into the long hallway. Immediately, I threw down my broom and chased after him. I ran down the hallway and out into the lobby, where this kid had disappeared. I walked further into the lobby and saw my boss outside the front entrance on a smoke break. "Who's the kid?" I asked, and Jeff looked at me. For a moment he was confused, but then he laughed. I'll never forget how casually he said it. "So you met Charlie?" Charlie was another entity customers often complained about. On several occasions they claimed a little blonde-haired boy was running up and down the aisles in the theatre, causing all kinds of noise and ruckus during the movie. Of course, it was in Theatre 5. When an usher would come to apprehend the child, he would be gone. The female staff affectionately named him Charlie, after his resemblance to the character in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Charlie was also responsible for knocking over several cans of garbage, throwing papers out, misplacing things, and making our janitorial duties a pain in the arse. Charlie wasn't frightening, just more of a nuisance than anything. We used to theorize that he was the son of the tall man, but the two were never seen together. It took that experience for Jeff to admit that some people have seen and heard some things, which was his way of saying that the theatre was haunted. I found it odd, considering the theatre was relatively new. It was built in the 90s on some wetland, and according to some people that had lived in the area, the property was owned by a family who sold it off back in the 1980s. There was no evidence of foul play, and it was not an Indian burial ground. It was just a weird place where strange things happened. I didn't even realize there was a basement until my 3rd or 4th week. The basement, as I was told, was primarily used for storage. I'd give a better description, but that's as much as I know, considering the one time I was asked to go down into the basement. I didn't even know where the hell it was. It was a Thursday, and I was ready to get out of there. I remember that I had the next couple of days off, and I was ready to relax a little bit when I got home. I still had plenty of time on my shift, but this particular morning, I wasn't really dragging my ass. Jeff gave me a couple of bags and told me to drop them off in the basement. I told him that I didn't know where it was, and he pointed down the hall. The last door on the left, marked employees only, he replied. I started walking away, and he stopped me. Don't go down there by yourself. He added that with a bit of hesitation. There's a lot of shit down there, and I don't want you tripping over anything. There were usually only 3 of us working the shift. This morning it was Jeff, myself, and a co-worker named Trevor. Trevor was on the other side of the building cleaning out the theatre. I could hear his leaf blower running. Yeah, we use leaf blowers to blow the popcorn out of the theatre. I didn't want to bother walking across the building to grab him. I figured, I'm an adult. I can drop a few bags into a room. For Christ's sake. Jeff walks out the lobby to have a smoke, and Trevor is down on the other end of the building. I'm by myself, at the far end of a dark hallway. I open the door, and I'm looking at the long staircase that drops into the darkness. I flip the light switch onto my left, and there's a light at the bottom of the staircase. It's flickering. Of course it's flickering. Nobody ever went down there to fix it. I heard a door open from the lobby. Jeff hadn't returned. I'm just hearing things. I look back down the staircase, and I'm about to descend when I hear a voice from the bottom step. Hey. It's a low, raspy voice. And I pause. Hey. Come here. It says again. There's a shadow bleeding in from the bottom of the staircase. I can't tell what it is, but it is definitely a person. Hello? I called out. I don't know why I did. I know that I'm the only person on this side of the building. I know that there isn't just some person hiding in a dark basement. And at this point my heart is pounding, and I'm starting to sweat. Because I know it isn't normal, and I'm experiencing something that shouldn't be happening. You've got to see this. Come here and look. It says again. The voice is a little louder. It sounds scratchy, like someone with a cold. The shadow is bleeding further into the bottom of the steps. Whatever's down there is coming closer. I toss the bags down to the bottom, turn off the light, and walk down to the lobby. Jeff is walking back inside, reeking of cigarettes. I tell him about what happened. He has a look on his face that tells me this isn't the first time something like this had happened. He almost looked irritated when I tell him I was going to go in by myself. Nothing here's gonna hurt you, he finally said. I think I was taken aback more by Jeff's reaction than the actual incident. Later on, I told Trevor about what happened. We went back to the steps to investigate, and I turned on the flickering light. The bags I had thrown were gone. Theatre 5 had its instances, and the basement was particularly scary, but nothing was quite as bad as my experiences with the projector area. Around 6 AM, we would take a 30-minute break. Jeff and Trevor would usually go to McDonald's to eat, but it was always too early for me, so I'd lay in the hall and listen to my iPod. No matter how loud I turned my music, I could never cancel out the sound of the footsteps from the projector area. It sounded like a 300-pound linebacker sprinting back and forth, heavy, loud thumps up and down the hall above me. I told Jeff about it once, and he remarked that it was just the building settling, and there was a lot of equipment upstairs making all sorts of noise. Jeff wasn't the smartest guy, but that didn't stop him from insulting anyone else's intelligence. Maybe he was just trying to keep me from quitting. The turnover rate was pretty insane at the theatre for cleaning staff, and the creepiness was a big factor. The prey was pretty garbage too, but that's a whole other story. So it wasn't long before I started feeling apprehensive about going upstairs to check the projectors. and turn on the lights in the theatres below. On one particular occasion, I was walking up the steps to the hallway, and I heard what sounded like a child call my name from the bottom of the steps. I knew it was Charlie, because, well, how many children are in the theatre at 4 AM? This was the first instance of hearing my name. For a week straight, I'd hear voices echoing down the hall from the projector room, Theatre 5, or down the hall. That was easy to ignore once I put my iPod on, but it never shook the feeling of being watched. I had never seen the tall man in person. I only ever had instances where I encountered Charlie, heard noises, or saw shadows. My only experience with it was at the start of my shift, when I was the first to arrive at work. If you're first, it's your job to go upstairs and turn on the theatre lights in the projector hall. I wasn't happy about it, but it looked like it was going to be another morning where Jeff and Trevor were late, and I didn't want to mess around with my shift by waiting around. Since the projector area is dark, typically we'd carry a flashlight with us, going around flipping switches. That morning, I couldn't find the flashlight, which we'd later find in the garbage. Thanks, Charlie. So I walked through the dark hallway of projectors, flipping all the switches. I had stayed up all night prior, watching the Andy Griffith Show, which I remember because I was whistling the theme song to myself as I walked down the corridor. Once again, I got the feeling of being watched, and something several yards away, in the area with the projectors overlooking the IMAX theatre rooms, was staring back at me. I stopped whistling and tried to focus my eyes. It was a cardboard cutout. They were everywhere, so I dismissed it and was about to flip the next switch when the cutout moved. I froze. What I thought was a cutout was actually a figure hunched over. It was quietly whistling the Andy Griffith's theme song, imitating me, only whistling slowly. Slowly, it rose up from its crouch, revealing itself to be at least 7 feet tall. It was a man. All I could see was a silhouette against the red exit sign light above, and some of the projector computer monitors. It started towards me, whistling quietly. I wanted to move, but for some reason my feet were cemented in the spot, and I had cotton for a tongue. I didn't know what to do. Slowly the tall man stepped towards me. He walked with a bit of a waddle, as if he had a limp on his left leg. I couldn't exactly tell. He had taken about 3 or 4 steps towards me when something caught his attention, and he turned and walked into an office down the hall. I turned back and ran down the steps, and I waited outside the theatre until the boss and the rest of my crew arrived. I told them what happened, and they explained that the tall man existed, but that he wasn't going to hurt me. I didn't care. I put in my 2 weeks and haven't looked back.